And that's it for the intro. While we were waiting for everybody to show up, again, my name is Chris Jarvis. I'm with the RW Institute. Today, we're going to hear from Carmen Perez. She's the founder and partner at Better Next. She used to be with CECP, which is where I first met her. And I think Carmen was the first time I came to DC with you to present to some of the CECP folks on the technology review. But before that, it was an Impact 2030 event in New York, I think. Right, like when it was just an idea to make something happen. Is that correct?
That sounds right. Yeah, there were a few different intersections, but I think you're right. It was Impact 2030 at the very beginning.
You have an incredible resume. You've been in this space for a long time, more than 5,000 hours. So Malcolm Gladwell may not consider you an expert because you haven't hit the 10,000, but you are halfway there. And that's further than most of us. He's since gone back on some of that stuff. And we're just thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. If you want to learn more about Carmen, you can check out in the chat. She's dropped her LinkedIn URL in there, and there'll be opportunities to connect with her at the end of the call. But that's enough for me. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to you, Carmen, and you can lead us into this rabbit hole of measurement, what works and what doesn't. But before she does, I just want to say, my thing with measurement around, let's say, volunteering has been there are kind of three approaches. One is used by, I think it's Chronicle of Philanthropy, but it may be the other group that kind of oversees nonprofits and volunteering at a national body in the United States. And I think they peg the average of all volunteering value per hour at something like $22 or $23. And so some companies take that and they just say, we had 1,000 employees who volunteered 1,000 hours times 24. That's a $24,000 contribution. That's pretty rudimentary. It gets in the ballpark. Secondly, True Impact has an approach where they look at the contribution and the value of the contribution around the skills that were needed. So if you hire a bunch of auditors to do auditing, how much would you have paid? And so companies can get that. And the third view is a little bit more rudimentary, but along the same lines. And it basically says, you know, we pay our employees an average $200, 1,000 people volunteered for 1,000 hours, therefore it's worth 200,000. It's kind of an input. And if they all painted one wall one day, I'm not sure it was a $200,000 contribution. So interesting. They all have merit to some degree, but they all kind of fall short in painting a real picture of what's going on, which is why this is an important conversation. So thank you, Carmen, for joining us. I can't wait to learn.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I'm going to pick up your Malcolm Gladwell reference because besides hours, you also need luck. And I feel lucky to be connected to you and to Realize Worth Institute and the whole team, because I think you do a lot of innovative stuff and you're willing to sort of look at where things are and also push the edges. And we really, really need that if we're going to be moving forward as a social impact field. So I'm so excited to be here and doing one of these webinars with you. So thank you for that. And I am really excited to talk about what's next in social impact measurement. So Chris mentioned I was with CECP. I was there 10 years and yes, thousands of hours. CECP is a coalition of companies. And so it's a really unique position to be in because you're looking right inside measurement practices and seeing the challenges, seeing what's working, hearing how companies are reacting to different changes that are happening in the field. And so I feel really fortunate to have that sort of grounding my measurement point of view in like the day-to-day realities of corporate social impact practices. At the same time, CECP was also in the business of research. So it wasn't just about what was happening on the ground for companies, but also what's happening in the field. Software, reporting standards, changes in different boutique firms, looking across all of that and seeing what's changing and trying to help companies sort of stay out in front of what's happening on trends. So that was another piece. We were doing deep dives with some companies, Discovery Ed, Intel, Campbell Soup. And then about a year and a half ago, I made the career choice to seek a little more independence and became a solopreneur with Better Next, and have loved that opportunity to go a lot deeper with some companies and be able to do things like write down a measurement point of view that I think can really support people and guide people as they're trying to get to that next level in measurement, which is all about how can we make sure that what we're doing is producing the best results possible, better results, improve our results. The other thing I want you to know about me is that before the corporate side, I spent 10 years in the nonprofit sector. So partnering with public housing residents to open up a credit union, some like locally owned assets, partnering with micro entrepreneurs to try to help them build their business, and thinking about how I could track and show that what me, the team, the community doing together was having the intended results. So those two things coming together are really inform my point of view. And I just want to make sure people know that before starting to share the measurement framework. So I am going to ask if we could do the first poll, which is not something I'm going to launch, but this is, as it already has been, interactive. We want to hear from people. We want people typing in the chat. You don't have to wait for us to prompt question and answer. Chris is going to keep an eye on it and call out any really important or interesting questions. But let's start out by just thinking about, like, over the last few months, what measurement challenge have you observed? If it's more than one, pick the one that's most frequent. And if you're not inside a company right now, it can be something that you've observed in what you're reading, or maybe you work with companies, you've got a lot of corporate clients. So just let us know which one of these you think is the biggest challenge. We're going to give people a chance to answer that. And if you don't see yours, you can type it in the chat because it might not be there. And this is like the first way that we're going to gauge where folks are at and hopefully answer all your questions as we go through this session on measurement. So I can't see response rate. I'm going to leave that to you, Dana. Whenever you feel ready, just go ahead and show where folks are at on the call.
Just a few more trickling in.
Okay, we'll give another second. Collaboration, this is all about, social impact data is done working with other departments in so many cases. So that's what that one is referring to. More meaning from current metrics. That was my prediction. And requests for an S and ESG metric that the team doesn't have. I think that relates a lot to more attention on S and ESG or social impact metrics inside companies. So I think we're going to hit both of those, and you can keep us accountable. If we don't by the end, let's make sure to come back to that. So thanks everybody for that. We can close out those poll results. And now I am going to dive right in.
And I just want to say, loving the participation in the chat. As we go through this, if you have a question, just write it down. Don't try and remember it. Just throw it right in the chat. We'll collect them, as Carmen said. If you have a contribution, meaning, yeah, but what about this? Or we use this framework, or have you heard of this? Throw that in too. More the merrier, get smarter together. And then finally, if you have a different experience, a contradiction, I say questions, contributions, and contradictions. It's not really a contradiction. It's just from your point of view, you've seen it a little differently. I'd love to hear that as well. And Carmen's right, I'll watch.
I totally agree. So I'm going to take several dramatic pauses and try to look and see what's in the chat and hear some Q&A so that you can guide the conversation to what you want to hear. So what's next in social impact measurement? I believe that because of the increased attention on S and ESG metrics, what we will see now is companies looking much more critically internally and saying, what S and ESG data do we need as a company, and trying to move their own measurement practices forward. And that will lead to, a few years down the road, more ability to find these standardized S and ESG metrics. But right now, it's a lot about inward attention on making sure that the information on social impact that people need, they have it, they have access to it. The other piece that I think is next in social impact measurement is being more human-centered. So all that we know about modern practices that we want to see companies take on in all departments will also apply to measurement. So we're going to break all of that down. This is the graphic for the measurement framework that I'm really excited to tell you about today. And the method statement is right at the top. So I want to start with that. And it's assess 4 practices, 4 pipelines, and 3 practices to plan for 1 year of progress. And if you remember one thing, that's what I hope you remember. And that's why it's got some tools to hopefully aid in memory, which is the 4, 3, 2, 1. If you see that in there, we've got some alliteration going on. So hopefully that makes it a little bit sticky and something that will stick with you as you move on and think about measurement all throughout the year. So that's the method statement. So now, as I said, I want to break this all down for folks. We're going to come back and sort of step through all the different pieces that are in this measurement framework. So we have to talk about the who. Who's using the framework? Who were we thinking about when this was put together? And the term I'm using is corporate social impact professionals. I'm sure everyone here knows that social impact inside a company, the scope of responsibilities can vary. Community investments, working with community stakeholders, volunteering, might be human rights. There could be some diversity, equity, and inclusion externally work that's done there. So it can vary, but let's say corporate social impact professionals. Another thing that's really crucial about what it's designed for is a measurement practice. So we want to look across all metrics, think about all of the measurement that might be happening in that space. And I would contrast that with measurement, which is designed for a program. So most are familiar with theory of change exercises, and those most frequently are used when you're thinking programmatically. There's this particular issue, a particular strategy, and how are we going to measure across that? So the practice is what we want to look at here. So before we start breaking down this framework, I want to set a little more context with which is, what would measurement look like at a company if there were absolutely no outside influences? It would be about identifying critical issues, considering all stakeholders, ideally, setting a strategy, resourcing, acting upon it, and here comes measurement. Did we do what we intended to do? How is it going? What are we learning? What are we hearing from partners? What are we hearing from members of the community? And then based on that, adjusting strategy. This is measurement in the forest with no one around. The reality is, there are an incredible amount of influences on a measurement practice. There's the social impact team at the center with the strategy. And then the very first set of influences is internal. I've just put a few on here, but these are requests. That second challenge, the top second place challenge about having data that you request for data that you might not have. IR is probably a culprit of that for many people. It might be comms when doing an annual report on the work, but thinking about how all of the demands and the needs from that outside circle of internal forces inside the company is next. One further circle out are all the external forces. So I've listed a few here. I would love in the chat if anyone thinks I have missed a certain group, and just to say who's in any one of those. Standards, you can see a couple of there. I'm using the term network for some of the groups that want to advise, published thought leadership, corporate coalitions, also doing consulting. Raters, I'm separating raters and rankers. So raters typically are investor community oriented, not always. Those who like to publish ranking usually lean a little bit in the direction of media publications. Software sources, research, all of these different pieces sort of coming together and seeking to influence a company's measurement practice. And for good reason, because that measurement in isolation, people were looking for support, looking for information. There was a question in the chat about how do you decide on what are the best metrics? The source of some of these bodies, these entities, was to answer that type of question. So we're thinking about the completely isolated version, now the fully influenced version of a measurement practice, and how do we break all of that down? So then we'll return now to this framework, which is to provide guidance. We said we're going to talk about like an annual cycle, how to advance an annual cycle of measurement, and that's what we're here to do. Fully knowledgeable about those different influences that might be coming at your measurement practice.
Hey, before we go into this section, can I interrupt, Carmen? Like I promised I would. Okay. Jamie Vargas asked a question. What about community partners, NGOs, nonprofits, community-based agencies, social enterprises, etc.? How do they factor into the three circles? They're external, I suppose, from a company perspective.
For social sector, I wrote some like umbrella organizations, but yes, all of the partners that are then within that. That is a great, great call out though. So thank you for that, Jamie.
All right, perfect. No, we're good on the questions and comments. Back to you.
Hey. Okay. But if I do a final version, maybe I'll call that out even more explicitly. So I like that. Okay, so if this was written as a process, the process would have 3 steps: an assessment, making a plan, and acting on the plan. So that is not enough detail to really guide people, but I want to emphasize that this first step is an assessment. And what do we ask people to assess? The first thing is the infrastructure. So pipelines are not a reference to a sales pipeline, but instead to the infrastructure. What is making the information flow around social impact? So if we're talking about various ways to look at what are the results from a volunteering practice, when we think about like the longer term effects that might be occurring, what needs to be in place first is all about the pieces that are there to collect data, which is the one that I find is most commonly attended to. So software and surveys. And where I find gaps are around articulating definitions and a final or single source of truth. So people, typically one person might know where those final numbers are, but making sure that there's a final single source of truth that's really well known is something that I think is part of the future, so that there's greater use to the social impact data inside the company. And the network. So this is people. These are not literal, the infrastructure pipelines, but instead the people that make it happen. Because social impact data is different than so many other types of data that are out there. It's not sort of behind a website collected automatically. There aren't necessarily software systems or apps where people are just sort of tracking how they might be sort of transitioning out of a difficult situation or responding to a particular social justice issue. So it requires people, it's human. And so the network of people connected to the infrastructure is something that I find really important to call out and to attend to. One of the points of view for this framework is that it should be accessible, and companies can choose the depth and rigor with which they apply it. So we're going to show, using our Miro, all those fun tools in Miro, one way that you could do an assessment of the pipelines, which is to categorize what has already been done. So they have to be built. And then each and every year they can be assessed for maintenance. If definitions haven't been looked at for several years, they need to be brought back into the light. Looking at, have certain things been locked into that final scorecard for the year that maybe need to be sunset? So there's lots that can be done there. And then using this as one of the inputs that's going into the ultimate plan. So the assessment of the practices is the heart and soul, I would say, of the framework. So when I receive feedback through different feedback sessions before releasing it, people pointed out that this is a real differentiator and something that is not available in other measurement frameworks that are out there. So let's just break it down, and I want your reactions and see if you agree, disagree, sort of building this out together. The first is calling out uses, articulating uses of social impact data. So this is really important because you might uncover pieces that are used a lot, some that aren't used that much. And if we want to be more human-centered in our measurement practices, it has to be focused on collecting data that is informing decisions. That's a big part of learning inside the company, first and foremost. No collection, measurement for measurement's sake, let's say. That's a common phrase. And then in the guide for this framework, it's also going to talk about, like, how can you increase usage without necessarily collecting more data from social sector partners. So examples of that would be like drawing in some public data sources, thinking creatively about benchmarking and comparison points, so that when people are looking at the social impact data, they have a clearer picture of how to understand those numbers. That's what that context is all about, making sure people feel clear on how they should interpret and learn from what they're looking at. That's better use. I'm going to jump over to better balance, because that one I think is also really connected to what people think a lot about when it comes to measurement, which is what to measure. So because we want to address the measurement practice as a whole, you're looking across all the different metrics. Instead of taking a line like the only important improvement is looking at outcomes or longer term changes, it's more about getting your range of metrics in balance. So one way you need to make sure you have balance is whenever you've done some sort of deep investments in a particular issue, thinking about that longer term change and whether or not the metrics reflect it, you have to have that in balance. Is that even represented? But it's not only that when it comes to balance, it's also making sure there's balance in terms of the categories of metrics that are represented. Some should be operational and tracking the performance of different activities you have going on at the company. Some should represent business results. And so assessing the balance is an important piece of the process. Both of those best practices, assessing both of those best practices are going to give you ideas, potential improvements. And then I saved better to people for last because ultimately the decision-making around finding improvements should be about these human-centered decisions. How does measurement affect people? So you might be familiar with like the Equitable Evaluation Initiative. There's a lot of folks out there talking about evaluative studies and how to improve those and make sure that they do no harm, that they're designed in partnership with communities, community organizations, and people living in the neighborhoods themselves if a particular neighborhood is being studied. And we think that should apply to measurement as well. So this is the piece of the puzzle, which is really important to make sure that your measurement practice is modernized. So that sounds really theoretical. So let's now break down what we really mean by that. So this is an example of how to do an assessment, which considers assessing whether or not the measurement practice can be better to people. So on the left-hand side here, you can see practices, areas of knowledge. You probably know a few people who are experts in inclusion, who think a lot about corporate ethics. And we want to make sure that all of those principles apply when taking any of the actions that are on the right, which are the actions of measurement, the tasks, when things happen, when we say we're looking at new data, how did we get there? So data governance, writing surveys, assessing and interpreting the results. It's really important to make sure that a measurement practice, which is sort of myopic towards like, we need to know what our results are, it has to pause and say, have we thought about any potential perpetuations of inequities that we might be doing intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or unconsciously? So there might be one individual who has every year sort of run the results out of the software, done some slides. There might be a way to make that process more inclusive. Has anyone looked at the way a pre and a post survey is written to consider, is any of the language perpetuating inequities? So that I hope feels a little bit more tangible when we say better to people. We want to make sure that a measurement practice sort of steps back, focuses on improving results, measuring results, representing those to the best that it can, and then also factoring in the effects on the people that the data represents. I want to pause there. There was a lot in pipelines and practices. I don't know if there's anything in the chat. Is there any clarifying questions or builds, or I can't remember your 3 C's, Chris. Do we have any contradictions?
Questions, contributions, or contradictions? I got a couple here. Let's go through them really fast. Andy Reed asked, how do employees fit into this? They are, if you think about giving and volunteering, they are the primary cause of these metrics. How do they fit into the process, or do they?
I love that question. So there's a lot of talk right now about, as we said, a lot of attention on S and ESG metrics. And when we think about how they're advancing, people will sometimes compare to environmental metrics, or they'll say, you know, what do investors want? And in my point of view, if we were to sort of line up stakeholders, when it comes to who is the stakeholder group that's sort of putting pressure on the advancement of S and ESG metrics, it should be employees. I think employees are the ones who have enough stake in the company itself, awareness of social issues, and it's a diverse group. Obviously, any employee base is going to represent diversity, ideally. And so the employee role is crucial, I think, in the advancement of S and ESG metrics. And I think investors are a little bit further behind in the line.
Okay, that's interesting because I think business leaders would say the exact opposite. The reason they're all switching from CSR to ESG is because of investment and because of, BlackRock and others are demanding it, but S is woefully misunderstood or not understood. So that's a whole other conversation. But that is interesting. And it leads me to the other question. You mentioned under the Better to People part, how to involve the community as partners in the data collection and understanding it. Now, could you quickly, or maybe you have an example, but I know John Brothers and I, when we did the Listen Up show earlier this year, and we talked about trust-based philanthropy, he is a strong point of view. And of course, that entire initiative does on don't ask, and you already mentioned it, don't ask for data that you don't need or understand. But you're proposing a sort of joint evaluation process, whether or not we have time to do that, or that's a whole thing in and of itself. Do you have an example of what that would look like, or could you maybe explain a little bit more how that's different from our current practice?
Well, I do think that despite being maybe like a big thinker myself, when I try to do my work, I do try to be practically oriented. And so the reality for most large companies is that the measurement wheels are turning. Data has been collected, there's years of it. And so thinking about the transition is most important to me, rather than this sort of perfect endpoint, because that doesn't happen. So that's just a little intro to say, when you're looking at your measurement practice, the way that information from partners right now is happening, it might be in a spreadsheet, a document, a software. The opportunity for partner organizations to say, this is how we're tracking our progress, is many people say that they espouse that practice, but then their pipelines may not show that. So how do you set up a system where you're allowing partners to report to you how they're tracking their progress? And for a while, suspending any demands on comparability, relieving some perfectionism around that data, and allowing partners to guide the way that they are looking across their programs to say that they're making progress.
Okay.
Is that where you were going with the?
Yeah, it's close enough. It's good. It's good. Thank you, Carmen. A couple more questions coming in now. Peter Klassen, anybody who's involved in private equity or investment or allocation space, connect with him. He's on his email in there. That's very cool. Lauren asked a question, any tips for how to set the stage for buy-in when the practice stage involves so many business units and they all operate in silos and they don't even know each other? I added that last part.
Yeah, I'm going to use that as my segue into actually the next step, because I completely agree. And I acknowledge and recognize that practical reality, which gets in the way of advancing. So
perfect. I'll grab the other questions, Carmen, and we'll hit them later, just to let everybody else know. Okay.
Yep. And keep them coming. So this assessment of pipelines practices, if you're a team of one, it is possible to sort of at least step back and do a light touch look across these different things. You might be able to convene, make an intentionally diverse team to convene. It could be done with a couple of partners, but you've got your assessment. And what needs to happen next is the plan. So project management, familiar to everyone. What's important is applying it to measurement practices, because so often measurement discussions get really visionary, get very long-term. We're sort of picturing that future state that we want. And we have to come back to earth and say, what can we accomplish this year? Who is already bought in and involved? Which departments Can I find someone who is passionate enough about these topics that they're willing to connect me to this person who's got access to a survey platform, or this person in another department who partners with an external firm to measure our reputation? Those are some, that's a business results example. But the plan phase is taking all of that assessment and prioritizing it down. This is where the progress over perfection adage really comes into play. So because we're trying to take a measurement practice to its next best state, like in what can it look like next year that will be better than what it was the previous, prioritizing feasibility, we want to help kickstart that plan. So the assessment that we're talking about, if you're unsure when that should begin based on your cycles, do a debrief at the end of Q4 and a deeper dive in the beginning of Q1. Use Q1 to plan. So your numbers from the previous year might not be final yet. You might still be asking for those, but you already have a sense of what has gone well, what has not gone well, what you're going to be reporting out on. Maybe not the exact numbers, but about the practice. So you can do that assessment, that plan, and you're spending the year carrying out the plan. Project management, assigning tasks, owners, deadlines, celebrate your progress, and then you have completed a set of measurement improvements such that you're starting the new year with a clean data year. At minimum, we want to recommend people are holding quarterly meetings that are, the agenda is topically defined. So business results, social results, best practices refers to what are best practices in a social impact function inside a company, how those are being measured, and then operational excellence. So Q4, you might have someone from finance coming in. Q3, you might have someone from ERG coming in. Social results, you might have someone from comms and marketing coming in. Business results, it might be the head of people. You've also got your core team. So in this way, these silos, people feel like they're learning, they are having an opportunity to get feedback, the relationships, that network that we talked about in pipelines are being maintained, some might be being built, and you're also contributing to use. You're setting a moment when everyone is gathering to review information about hopefully social change that the company is involved in. And that's going to change the ability to involve people in activities all throughout the year. I'm not trying to make it sound easy, but doing these steps and being consistent with it each and every year brings more people into the fore. And so it will have a domino effect year over year when done with consistency. So I believe really strongly, I'm really confident in this particular flow, thinking holistically across all these different things, that people can make progress. You can do something, you might have just had a light bulb during this session that you might be able to take forward and take action on. You can do a deeper dive. You can try to really structure out a full year of intense work around measurement. There's a whole range of depth and rigor that you can do. But most importantly, if this framework becomes part of the ethos that you think about with your measurement practice, progress can happen each and every year. And progress is important in measurement because it improves results, helps focus on, are we tackling the issues we intended to tackle? It's going to hopefully reduce inequities if better to people comes to life. And it's going to save people time, because measurement work can get technical. Measurement has an inertia quality. So you always want to be refreshing so that you're using people's time as best as you possibly can. And that's what I think is next in measurement. I see a few more chat box. I don't know if you've got any good questions in there, Chris.
Sure do. Yeah, well, you just hit it. Okay, so Michael asked the question earlier on, and I responded about S being at the bottom because, and I just said there's really no standard around what S means. Broadly accepted frameworks for collecting the data, reporting the data. Each firm, like Moody's, whatever, seems to use sort of a different approach. And Carmen, we've even seen companies go back and go to a different registry if they didn't like the way they looked on the other one, and they look better. So and then we had a good response from Peter Klassen, who suggested that from the private equity community, 3 years max before we get a different some good materiality and frameworks around S. But he suggests that we're going to have to use a fundamentally different approach, which goes to something I heard someone suggest the other day, which is why are ESG all clumped together? Like we don't do other areas of business evaluation all in a big clump like that. So what are your thoughts around the materiality of S? Because while we're collecting this data, you say around employee giving and volunteering community investment, right now, it doesn't seem like it has anywhere good to go.
Yeah. So there's so much in there and I want to comment on all of it. Let's see how much of it I can remember.
Okay.
One thing that I'll say is that I like before there was a day when investors didn't have access to the financial databases that they do now, and they had to look individually at companies to sort of do their own assessment of them. And I think that that's how, for investors, social issues should be addressed. You have to just look at PayPal, look at Salesforce, and see what their in publicly disclosed information is telling you in order to assess their progress on social issues. So that's one thing, because I do agree that it's going to take time for the social data to develop and for us to feel also that the people in power making decisions about what should be standardized are representative of what that data shows. So rushing a decision doesn't make sense to me at all. And I'd also agree with what you said about people have started to compare, like, what can we learn from environmental data? How can S learn from environmental data? I think that's fundamentally flawed. Environmental data is scientific. It's water, it's waste, it's air, it's carbon, you know? So to me, if we're going to look to other sources of how data has become comparable, we should be looking towards, let's say, the education sector or the health sector, or what's happened with the census through the years. So these are issues which are connected to the social realm, and they have found ways to make data and collect information systematically. Those are all flawed as well. So I'm not saying that any one of those examples I use is perfect, but it is a better way to find paths to standards than looking at environmental data, in my opinion. Because it recognizes the complexities of social issues, which are less scientific than other.
Okay, so on this point, and this might be too much of a rabbit hole, and you can say stop. We do have a few more questions. I appreciate everybody on the call asking questions. This makes for a much more interesting conversation than I just logged in and listened and hung up kind of thing. So thank you for doing that. I don't know if you caught. Do you watch John Oliver, Carmen?
Sometimes.
Last week, tonight?
Not regularly, yeah.
Did you see the one on carbon tax credits or offsets?
No.
Okay, I recommend it to everybody on the call, because while carbon tax credits are further advanced, I remember the first time I heard about it, like way back when, thinking, what is this and who would do it? And in fact, in the beginning, who's going to buy carbon tax credit? So that you're right, that we began with a kind of half-baked idea and it evolved and it's become something more appropriate. It's not perfect yet. And so John Oliver was making the point that offsetting your carbon doesn't actually help the world. It just stops us from doing more harm to the world, right? So, and the thing with ESG is it really doesn't care about the company's impact on society or the environment. It cares about the environment's impact on the company, right? So, so in light of this, how long will it take to get to a good place in your mind around, say, materiality? Frameworks like this can be widely adopted, but then it goes into a standardized understanding of what it all means. That doesn't get us to a place where we underpay our employees over here, but look, we built a bunch of playgrounds over there, so we're good. Like, do you see a future where this becomes so sophisticated that we can see that kind of discrepancy in a company as well?
I think each year it will get better because I'm an optimist.
Okay.
And where do I see an end date? I don't know if I have an end date, but like we were talking about raters and rankers, and we can thank them because they have pushed transparency and they have encouraged reporting and they have encouraged disclosure. Have they run their course because they are contradictory, their methodologies aren't clear, the data might not be what they need it to be? Yeah, but they're a step in the process. So I think looking at everything as a step in the process to me is sort of a maybe a glass half full kind of viewpoint. Because when I talk about like companies going inward with their measurement practice and focusing on where are we extracting on social issues, where are we able to uniquely contribute, let's see how we're moving forward on those. And then you see the measurement that results from that. It is very inspiring. And those ultimately can become the new standards down the road. So,
and down the road is like a decade from now or something. By 2030, can we just say, we're going to have this all figured out by 2030?
It'll be better. It'll be better. I don't know when we'll be done.
I have no idea how you're going to answer this question.
Here's an example. This is an example I love because I do think it makes people sort of think about the way they think about data.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Data on race. People are trying to figure out what data on racial demographics should companies report.
Okay.
And it becomes very complicated, right? And so we'll see targets. We want a target at an executive level of leaders of color, for example, all of these things. Imagine a system that had been built to instead represent a reduction in the majority. So the data is now emphasizing we want a reduced percentage of white executives in the United States. That's a total different framing.
Yeah, that is quite different. That is quite
total different framing. We're going to focus on retirement. We're going to focus on sunset packages. You know, so the systems themselves will perpetuate as they are right now. I'm a dreamer, but I'm not that, impractical to think that those things will be sort of flipped on their head. But because I know those systems will perpetuate, the changes by 2030, if we thought of like one of those like bar graphs, those wave graphs, the good data will be sort of rising and the bad data will be decreasing, but there isn't going to be like that moment, like they say in Good to Great, like transformations don't have a moment. They have this like slow and steady.
Poor Jim. You threw Jim under his own bus there. Get the right people on the bus and you push him in front of his own bus. Carmen, one other, no, it's good reference. One other thing, I'm going to send out to everybody something called recycling in DEI worlds. It was just sent to me yesterday as a report. And it basically weirdly shows that at the C-suite level, good diversity. Upper executives, none of the same. And Black leaders are being recycled from board to board to show diversity, and it could be a problem. So I had never even heard of that. That blew my mind. Do you feel good about addressing a couple more questions in the next 5 minutes?
I do. I'd love that. And I'd also want to ask Dana, we've got a feedback question. So I just want her, if she can, to pop that up on the screen and people can answer it while we keep answering more Q&As.
Perfect. Okay. All right, there it is. There's audience feedback. How many light bulb moments? You may not have had yours yet, so just hit delay. Just don't feel like you have to answer right away. We'll leave it up for a couple minutes here. Okay, going back, Tara asked, we are in the process of investing in a volunteer management system and identifying best metrics to measure and how to best engage employees. Would love to connect with others on this. Okay, so she's just throwing it out there. You can connect to Tara on that. Typically, those platforms focus mostly on outputs, or actually in terms of community investment, inputs. How much money, how much time, how many people? Those are all inputs. What's your output from that? From a program perspective, if you're trying to get 40% involved, then that obviously becomes an output. So again, to your point, it depends on the point of view that you're collecting the data from.
Right. Can I add two things to that?
Yeah,
while you
yeah.
check out for the next question. So one is, if you're implementing a brand new system, one thing you can do is not only collect the volume, but make sure to check in with employees about whether or not that service opportunity is something they would have done already, or is it new for them because of the company? So in that way, you're able to establish the connection between what the company has offered to employees and whether or not you're inspiring new service, new volunteering, which I think is unique when you're at the beginning of something like that. And the other is value volunteering, which is a report I was a part of at CECP with a bunch of people. So check that out too. I think there's some good insights in there.
Okay, we may have answered this already. No, I'm going to ask another one first from Joseph from European Solidarity Corps. Thank you for joining us from Europe. Which IT program would you recommend for project management where impact measures can be included into it? Beyond maybe what I just said, how many hours, how many people, how many places, how much money, how much time. And then he said, like, should I be using Excel, Slack, like some ideas? If you weren't going to use Benevity Your Cause, Volontaire, a bunch of them that are out there that you can find in the technology report. If you want to download it, it's free, and we can drop that link in again right now. Yeah, is there another way to kind of get this? Is there another mechanism that you've seen used that's pretty good?
If you're inside a large company, this is to me where internal relationships can really come to bear, because there are likely, for example, is there an employee intranet where people are logging in already? There could be sort of database capabilities that go beyond just what they're tracking in there already, that could include some social results information as well when it's on the employee side. If it's on partnerships, what within, if there are, so that might be grant making, what within finance could be enhanced in order to include some questions about what the partners might be reporting to other funders, what data they already have on their results that you could sort of incorporate within. So I am big on use what you have, and don't create a barrier for yourself like, oh, we don't have the budget, so now we're stopped. It is true. Many large companies are still using spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So don't hold yourself back. And then the other piece, if you're just starting out with that, is I do also encourage thresholds. So right size your reporting, your metrics based on the size of the relationship.
Right. And there are a lot of platforms, download the report. There are a lot of platforms that are smaller, and you're not going to have to pay the big 6 figures like for the big 3. And they will work really well for you. So Andy asked a question, appears, and this goes to what you're saying about a collaborative approach to research. And this will be the last question. If we didn't get to your question, don't worry. We'll ask Carmen afterwards. We're going to save the chat and she will answer all questions. I don't know if she will. Here it is. You will? Okay, good. Just announced it like you were going to anyways. And I've totally thrown myself off. Oh, Andy's question, Andy Reid. It appears that materiality is a driver. How and what shows up in the ESG report? No, I just lost my screen here. Just a sec. Sorry. There's a real weird thing that happens when it switches to full screen. Okay, now I can't even see it. Where did Andy's comment go? Here it is. Okay. And they're governed by the 3 entities, SASB, SASB, GRI, IRC, Moody's, and a few others. Not sure much community-driven measurement is taken in place. Can you speak to measurement with community? And is it going to affect materiality? Now, obviously, the roundtables that we're doing, fixing the S and ESG with Jason Saul, the University of Chicago. You can check that out. We've got another roundtable coming up this fall. Day hasn't been given yet. But do you, Carmen, know of any examples where these ratings agencies have actually gone to the community and investigated materiality themselves? Or are they just saying, look, it's basically got to be this or so this, do you have that data or not? Like I've seen on the Bloomberg dashboard, do you do employee volunteering? Yes or no? Yeah, okay, you're good. But more sophistication than that, do you have any examples of these agencies doing that kind of cooperative research or investigation?
There could have been one-off research projects, but I think the reality of the investor databases, the ESG databases, is that that's driven by corporate reporting. So yeah. Analysts are looking at corporate reports. If they happen to have something from a community partner, it might show up there. But I only put up this SWOT, we didn't get to it because I wanted to say that SASB is woefully behind in the way that it represents the S and ESG. So it would be bad for the field, in my opinion, if SASB became the standard for S and ESG. It is so skewed to investor risk management that the attention to social issues is
negligible. Yeah.
So I want
okay. That's great. Okay, 1 minute. Carmen, give us our last thought. It's been fantastic having you on the show, and then I'll let everybody know what's next.
So I want to encourage everybody that measurement in its best self is really focused on improving results and making social change. It's an agent of change. And whatever your measurement current state is, focusing on making it better each and every year, I think is not only good for yourself, your company, your team, your partners, but it's going to ultimately lead to that more perfect future of S and ESG data. So stay the course, focus on those results and the ethical decisions behind them, and things will get better. Great. What can we do here as we're wrapping up? I just want to let everybody know
You're going to get a follow-up with everything that was said. We won't put the LinkedIn URLs in, so go back through the chat right now and connect to everybody you can. And then we will give you all the links to all of this. You'll be able to reach out to Carmen. Carmen, what are some action points that we can take from you?
Yeah, I'd love for everyone to connect on LinkedIn. You can email me at carmen@betternext.co. And I'm flashing this screen. I don't know if you can see it, but it's where you can download the guide. So the guide is free and it's more detail on what I said. So if anybody wants more, file it away for when you're about to do a measurement session with your team. And it's there for you.
Awesome. It has been great to have everybody on this call today. We really appreciate everybody's time. Carmen's URL for LinkedIn is there. We will provide those 2 action points, links that you can download the report if you didn't catch it, or email her directly. Carmen, you're magnificent. Thank you for making us all better in this space and for your continued contributions. And thank you everybody who put their video on. You are the real stars of this show. You left it on. You may not know it's on, doesn't matter. It's awesome for the chat, for the contributions. This is what makes these calls so informative and smart. And I just appreciate everybody joining. And for those of you who are getting this recording, you missed a good one, but I understand if you're in India, you're asleep. So that's it.
And we appreciate you, Chris. So thanks for the moderation and all your best thinking. So.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Carmen. All right. We'll see everybody
Thanks,
on the next
everyone.
one.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.